Welcome to Part 5 in John Tiller Software's Civil War Campaign series. In the last part, we talked about movement points and how the different types of units move across the map, and how movement points are factored into all of that. In this part, we are going to discuss how to fire offensively and how the results for those fire combats are determined. We will also look at Hexed modifiers more and how they influence things around the battlefield during combat. As always, this series is brought to you by the American Civil War Gaming Club, where you can find hundreds of online Civil War gamers ready to engage you in these classic contests. Feel free to check us out at acwgc.net for more information. All right, let's head out to Fredericksburg, Virginia, and talk more about fire combat. Welcome to Fredericksburg. The most common form of combat in the campaign series is called fire combat. This means the firing of infantry, cavalry, or artillery against enemy forces from a distance. This is opposed to melee combat, in which units are grappled in hand-to-hand combat. In fire combat, the two opposing units are occupying different hexes, and one is firing upon the other. Let's start basic. In order to fire your unit, you must double-click or highlight a friendly unit, and then hold down the Control key, and you will notice that the cursor changes into a crosshairs symbol. Then right-click on the enemy hex you wish to fire into. Easy. As you can see here, it shows you how many casualties were inflicted during the fire combat. This is very simple and all you really need to know. But sometimes you're probably curious as to why it is this number and maybe not a higher one or a lower one. That's where things get more complicated. As we talked about in the last video, there are Hexed modifiers and terrain modifiers, which affect movement. These same things can also affect fire combat. Obviously, men behind a stone wall or within the forest will take fewer losses than those standing just in an open field. Further, the quality of the unit firing will also affect the number of enemy losses during fire combat. Let's look into all of these and more. The first step is to come up here to Settings and make sure On-Map Results is not checked. This will show us more information after each fire combat rather than just the total losses at the end. Now let's redo the same firing that we did before and see what pops up. Okay, this time you can see a fire report has popped up on the screen. This gives us a bunch of numbers which we now need to decipher. It starts easy and gets harder from there. Range is obvious. We are 3 hexes away from our target. Simple. Modifier is next. In this instance, it says 0. We are firing on a unit in an open field with no Hexed modifiers. In this particular instance, there are no modifiers at work, which make our fire more or less effective. Lastly, we have fire, right down here. This is the one that requires a very long-winded explanation to fully explain, along with a calculator and a lot of patience. I will spare you the explanation because it would take quite a while to cover it all. For the full explanation of how fire combat numbers are calculated, you can check out our club's training academies or look in the game's manual for more information and the equations used to determine this. To oversimplify it, let's just say that the higher your fire combat number, the more likely you are to cause enemy losses. It doesn't always work out like that, but just know that you want the highest possible fire output during a fire combat. In this example, the fire combat value is 746. We have inflicted X number of casualties. Why do I say X instead of an exact number? Watch. I can redo this several times and get different numbers for casualties each time. But the 746 remains the same. Why? It all has to do with pure luck and a roll of the dice based on some mathematical equations the computer quickly does behind the scenes based on the fire value of 746. Now let's take a look at this unit here, and you can see that it is facing a Confederate unit behind breastworks to its front. Each Hexed modifier has a percentage that affects the fire combat. This is readily available to see in the parameter data under the Help menu. I have pulled it up on the screen here for us to use. You will see here that it says breastworks have a modifier of 30%. That means that the offensive fire against it will be reduced by 30%. When we fire, we can see that the range is still 3, but the modifier is now negative 30. If you look down here, it still says fire 746. You would expect, because of the modifier of negative 30, that it would be 30% less. That's where things do get kind of interesting and confusing. But that negative 30% comes off the total casualty list, and the mathematics behind the scenes that is going on takes all of that into consideration. Other Hexed modifiers include things like stone walls. Here we have a unit firing on another behind a stone wall next to them. You can see that the modifier is now negative 40%. Hexed modifiers are one of your best friends. On defense, that is. Their correct usage can make your army a much stronger force and keep your losses under control during an enemy attack. A full hex may have a modifier attached to it as well, as opposed to just a single hex side of that hex. Let us come down here to these forest hexes and fire into them to show you what I mean. In the hex information box here, you can see it says forest negative 40%. A unit occupying this hex will then have a 40% modifier when fired upon. Just to prove it, we will fire with this unit here, and you can see that it works out exactly like it was supposed to. Another full hex modifier is an elevation change. Units occupying higher ground will receive a modifier bonus when fired upon. In this scenario, the bonus is 20%. Here's a quick example. Now, to really maximize your defensive abilities, you can combine a full hex modifier, such as an elevation change, and a Hexed modifier, like a stone wall, to make your position even more formidable. In this example here, we have a unit firing uphill at units behind a stone wall. The stone wall will give them a 40% modifier atop the 20% modifier of the higher elevation for a 60% modifier when fired upon. You can see now from this example that it works out exactly in that manner. Your troops will take 60% fewer casualties than they would without those modifiers. One last note. One of the default optional rules that members play with is called quality fire modifiers. Units which have a high quality of A or B, such as the 1st Minnesota here, will fire with a 10% bonus modifier. Units which are rated at C or D have no modifier in place. And then units which are poorly rated, such as E or F units, will have a negative 10% modifier. The purpose behind this optional rule is to reward the veteran units with more effective fire during combat. The ideas I briefly covered here are the basics of fire combat. More information is located in the game's user's manual and also in our club's training academies. The most important factors to your fire combat's effectiveness are range and modifiers. There are numerous modifiers not covered here, which it would be wise to know about and to learn from the parameter data in the game. Knowing these and how they affect combat will greatly aid you on the battlefield. That concludes part 5 of our series discussing fire combat and modifiers. For more information about our club and its free membership, head over to acwgc.net. In our next installment, we will go over artillery combat and how to fire, move, and use your artillery. We will discuss artillery tactics some and how you can stack up your artillery batteries for an even greater concentration of firepower. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a like on here and be sure to subscribe to our channel for future notifications of new videos when they are added. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.